as of late, I've been seeing more posts like this one. I am brave enough to say it, Linux is good now. If you want to feel like you actually own your PC, make 2026 the year of Linux on your desktop. And of course, the 1,000,001 different videos of I'm switching to Linux, I'm leaving Windows behind. For example, I've not seen this one yet, but people keep sending it to me. I will watch it, I'll get around to it, that'll probably be over on the React channel. There's been a lot of these, and say what you will about whether or not some of these YouTubers actually stick on Linux long term, but there is a lot more coverage of Linux happening, and there are a lot more people that are actually trying Linux out. And then, of course, we have the upcoming Steam machines, which even if they don't have massive, widespread adoption, hopefully it's going to sell better than the first ones did, because those ones did very badly. It's still going to be another step in that direction, another few steps towards mass adoption of Linux. Valve and many others are trying to make this experience as good as possible and actually make this a viable platform for the regular user. However, at the same time, just because Linux is getting better and just because you can absolutely go and use it, that doesn't mean that there aren't still legitimate problems that a regular person is going to run into. And I don't just mean that things are gonna be different. Of course, things are gonna be different. Of course, software's gonna have different bugs. That's just what it's like using a computer. The same thing's gonna be true going from Windows to macOS. I mean problems that exist on Linux that still do need to be addressed. And one of the often overlooked problems is peripheral configuration. So I'm using, can you see it? There we go. A G600, a Logitech G600. It's a discontinued mouse now. I like it. I'm going to keep using it until it breaks. I also have a Logitech keyboard. And me buying Logitech isn't just entirely random. The reason why I've bought Logitech is I know that I can actually configure this stuff under Linux. Most normal things you plug in, like a mouse, a keyboard, most controllers, a microphone, most of this stuff is just going to work out of the box. But when you want to do configuration on Windows, your option is the first-party tool available from your hardware provider. On Linux, I don't know of any of the mainstream peripherals that actually have a Linux version. For doing Logitech stuff and a couple of the brands, I make use of Piper. If you have some Razer devices, there is the Open Razer project. If you have Corsair, there is CKB Next. For other brands, I don't actually know what exists. There are these more general tools that maybe do support configuration, but there's no guarantee that what you have can actually be configured under Linux, at least in the current year. If you were to hand me some random device off Amazon on Windows, you could probably just go to their website, download their tool, and there you go. You're good, you can go and configure it. On Linux, maybe for RGB it works, but for doing like the macro key configuration, sometimes you're gonna be fine, other times, well, yeah. Thankfully, a lot of devices do have onboard memory, so there are workarounds. You can do things in a Windows virtual machine, for example, but that's awkward and that's annoying, and you don't want to have to do that if you don't want to. And I have a device where I need to do that. That is my 8-bit Do controller. Now you might say, oh, they have an Android app and you can configure it with the Android app. The Android app doesn't work. So the only option I have for configuring this thing is plugging it into a Windows machine or into a Windows virtual machine and then running their app through that and do firmware upgrades through that and all that good stuff. Because, yeah. Now this is one of those problems where as things get more popular, it becomes less of an issue. The reason why it's an issue now is there's just not that much market share on Linux. in the gaming space and various other spaces, it's just not really there yet, except like programming, for example. And with programming, every single thing is available on Linux. As more people use Linux, more companies are going to see the value in supporting this platform, or at the very least, supporting it because of the Steam machine and because of the Steam Deck, and hopefully we can start to get something. Once you step into the realm of the slightly less than standard things, now you start seeing some kind of random levels of support. Prime example being with steering wheels. So nowadays, most of the mainstream gear, things from Logitech, things from Moser, things from Thrustmaster, all of that stuff, it's in a pretty good state and is basically just going to work. Nowadays, actually is pretty much going to work out of the box as the drivers have been upstreamed. But when you start looking at some of the random cheaper gear, random things you're going to find on Temu, things like that, which otherwise probably would be working just fine on Windows, support is going to be mixed and very varied. Then we have some streaming gear. So nowadays, if you want to go and use an Elgato Stream Deck, there is a tool that we can go and configure it with. It's not as good as the Windows tool. It doesn't have as much integration. It does have a plugin store, so people are working on some nice things. Stream Controller is really, really nice. But if they decide to release a new Stream Deck with a new function or some new layout of the device, there is no guarantee that device is actually going to work with any of the configuration tooling, at least for the time being. It'll probably work mostly unless they, like, entirely redesign how it functions, in which case it would be a paperweight. And when it comes to other macro pads, who knows what kind of support you're going to get. Now, one area with a bit of fun is capture cards, because there's not really a great way to know before you buy it if it's actually going to work, unless you can find someone who also owns it, who's happened to have tested it on Linux. So I have an EVGA XR1 Lite. This works great on Linux, but the Elgato SKUs over the years have been a little bit weird. So what you want to look for is a capture card that supports V4L, Video for Linux. Basically, it's a capture card that is going to pretend like it is a webcam. Do you know if it's going to support this? No, because usually they don't advertise it. And Elgato had some capture cards which have since been discontinued, but there was the Elgato HD60 and HD60 Pro. These never worked on Linux because they had some custom drivers and needed some nonsense running on Windows. However, the HD60S and HD60X, I believe, they just work. But again, you wouldn't know this unless you dig around forums, watch videos from people who've tried them, and, you know, find out if it's actually going to work through other means, because the websites don't actually advertise it. A lot of things have gotten better in this regard, basically because of Apple. So Apple doesn't play these dumb driver games, so if you want something to work on Apple's devices, notably on the iPhone, you kind of need to support the generic open standard. This is something that's been happening in the audio space as well. This is why a lot of modern audio mixers just happen to work on Linux, because they want them to work on iPhones. So I wouldn't normally say this, but when it comes to hardware support, Apple in a lot of cases does kind of make things better for the Linux side as well, just by being big enough that they can say we don't want to deal with Windows nonsense. And of course, we have to talk about software support. So if you've just started on GIMP, on LibreOffice, it's very easy to say, just go and use them. And if you're working by yourself, doing some university work, just not really involved in a team, yeah, they're actually great projects. Or if you're somehow lucky enough to be in an environment where everybody else is working with those tools, great, go and use them. But if everybody else in the team is using Photoshop or using Word or using any of these other projects which have a Linux alternative but is not the same thing, guaranteed support is incredibly important. Knowing that if I save a file, it's going to be the same file that I give to another person, that makes teamwork actually possible. You don't have that in all cases. Now, some cases you do. Once again, development works perfectly on Linux. Dealing with plain text files and all this good stuff, that's great. But a lot of other areas, you can't just easily replace a tool. Now, of course, Wine does exist, and for a lot of things, Wine is going to be a way to run that Windows software on Linux. And things are easier today thanks to applications like WinApps. This basically takes a Windows Docker container and then lets you run the application inside of that. So basically you're running Windows on top of your Linux system, and for most things, this works well enough. It's not perfect, it's not going to solve every single problem, but for a lot of the things that people ask about, this is actually going to be good enough. It is not perfect, it has a lot of issues, but it's better than nothing. And if you desperately need a specific piece of software that you cannot replace, this is a thing you should probably look at. Now, for a lot of things, it's less about needing the software and more about it being something you're comfortable with, something that is convenient to use. For example, as mentioned earlier, I configure my mouse using an open source project. I configure my Stream Deck using an open source project. They're not perfect. They don't do everything the Windows software does, but it's good enough. And again, this is one of those areas where as the platform becomes bigger, as more and more people use it, it's going to become more and more commercially viable for companies to go and support Linux natively and actually bring their software over. If not that, well, a lot of things are moving onto the web, so look, if everything becomes a web app, as long as you have a web browser, it's going to be fine. Do I want that? No, but it's probably going to happen anyway. Now, you've probably heard of them a million times before, but gaming on Linux is in a pretty good state. Most things are just going to work. Most things on day one just work out of the box. I don't even go and check if a new game is going to work. Most of the time, it's just fine. With the exception of multiplayer titles. So, while single-player stuff is pretty good, except obviously single-player gacha games because money, compared to the multiplayer stuff especially, is, well, a mixed bag. We do have a lot more support than we did in the past, but there's still a lot of stuff where either it's not working or it is actively being denied. So, this is a great resource. Go check out Are We Anti-Cheat Yet? But a lot of the most popular games still don't work and are probably not going to work anytime soon. Maybe if the platform becomes big enough, they will say, oh, okay, let's make it work. Until then, though, it's not going to happen. Ultimately, what I would like to see is Valve come up with some solution that appeases the game developers and actually brings them on board. But until that happens, I didn't mean to do that. Until that happens, yeah, it's kind of just a mess. And Nvidia is also a bit of a mess. So if you're running an up-to-date distro with up-to-date drivers with reasonably modern Nvidia GPUs, things that are 16 or 20 series or later, you're in for a mostly good time. However, there are a lot of people on things like Ubuntu LTS, on Debian, and other distros which kind of just exist to ship out-of-date software. Obviously, it has security patches and things like that, but mostly out-of-date software. If you're one of those, your experience is still kind of going to suck. Then you have the fun situation where Nvidia has now dropped support for the 910 series cards from their drivers. So, any of the bugs those cards still had are going to remain bugs those cards still have, because they're not supporting them anymore. Now, some things will get fixed because they weren't actually driver problems. There were problems with the graphical environment. Fine. But any driver issues are gonna just remain there. And these are still relatively popular cards, so I don't know why Nvidia's dropping them. It's a whole big mess. I've done a video on this. Anyway, it's not gonna come back, so yeah. Then you have the open source driver project, which are mainly focused on the newer cards anyway. So there's that weird middle ground where things are kind of just not gonna be great. This is a problem that sort of naturally resolves itself over the years. In another 5 or so years, when the cards that are kind of barely supported now are now not supported and people are on much newer cards, things are going to be better, but there's going to be a whole crop of new people that are also on those old unsupported cards, which hopefully should be in a better supported state. We'll have to wait and see, though. Now, the complexity of distros and desktop environments is often brought up as one of these things which holds Linux back, and I understand why people make this argument because it's different to what you have on Windows. On Windows, you have Windows. Yes, you have Windows 10, Windows 11, anything else that might come out in the future, but there's still the main version of Windows. On Linux, there's not a main version. You have Ubuntu, Fedora, Arch Linux, Gentoo, NixOS, Manjaro, CachyOS, and all of these other different projects that all have their own different reason for existing. But I don't see this necessarily being a bad thing. Let's apply the distro logic to something far more consequential: buying a car. Swapping your distro is relatively easy. Buying a car, this is, even for a cheap car, probably a couple $1,000 investment. And this is something that hopefully you're going to stick with for a long time. But there are all of these different car brands and all of these different car models around, but no one says, oh, I don't understand why there isn't just one car. Why is there all of these different options? I just want car. Everybody understands that all of these different vehicles serve a different function. These different distros you have also serve different functions as well. And again, this is different to what you do when you're dealing with Windows. But I don't think this is a bad thing. There are other aspects of your life with this same level of choice that matter a lot more than just installing an operating system. I think the issue kind of just comes down to education and making the resources available. People know how to compare cars. People don't really know how to compare distros, and frankly, a lot of the comparisons out there that do exist kind of do a bad job at explaining what the choices are and what things actually matter. A lot of comparisons kind of break down to, oh, there is this different wallpaper, this different thing pre-installed, but that's all very surface level stuff that can very easily be changed. Whilst I love Linux, whilst I've been using Arch for a number of years now, I want people to understand that yes, things are getting better, and yes, you should absolutely try out Linux to make sure it's for you, but don't think that everything is just going to work. If you have some experience doing development and you want to help out, you want to make these projects actually good, you want to make it so you can actually configure your devices, use your devices on Linux without support directly from the major companies, absolutely get involved. But for people who are not going to get involved, you do still need to make at least some level of choice about the kind of things you're going to try to use. But let me know your thoughts down below. When you first switched to Linux, were there any things you needed to really keep in mind? Was it hardware-wise, software-wise, something else? I'd love to know. Let me know down below. If you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribe style Libera page linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and just give it a shot.